Welcome back to Soundwell Guitar. Today's video is going to be about doing arpeggios on the guitar using a technique known as sweep picking. But we're also going to get a little bit into the theory behind a way we can use these arpeggios to make them more musical. Okay, so first off, I said we're going to do arpeggios. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a chord where the notes are separated. When you play two notes or more at the same time, those are called harmonic intervals, and also they are what make chords. You play simultaneous notes, you've got harmonic intervals, and that's a chord. When you break them up, that's a melodic interval, and that's known as a broken chord in this case, because I took the chord and I broke it up. So that's what we're going to be doing is arpeggios. Now it's important to understand that these arpeggios are chords because most people that play guitar already know all their basic chords and they can apply that knowledge to their arpeggio playing. Also, we've done videos in the past that talk about different chords and ones that go well together and the formulas that we can use to recreate these quickly. So we're also going to get into the technique I mentioned, sweep picking. Now this isn't really going to be a YouTube video about the technique real specifically. You're not going to go super in depth with that. So if you don't know how to do it and you feel like you need a little bit more information, I'll make a video on it eventually, but I'm sure you can find plenty of YouTube videos that do it, like The Art of Guitar is a really good one. You can check out some of these guys will maybe help you out on that technique. But the basic principle is when you take a chord and now you're going to break up the notes, you want it to have this separation. And that separation is the desired sound as opposed to which is a different sound. All right. But oftentimes what comes into play with these techniques is we need different shapes. I mean, if I wanted to do a C arpeggio, whoops, that works, that qualifies as one. But usually when people are doing the picking technique, they like these other different go-to shapes. And what we're going to do on today's lesson is only two shapes, but I'll show you how to just go up and down the fretboard, creating all these different progressions and different keys and situations that you might find yourself playing in. And with only these two different shapes, as long as you get them down. And we're going to do also later in the video a way to break up the shape in a less linear fashion that creates an even more interesting type of arpeggio sound. So we'll start out with our most basic concept here, and we're just going to do a major arpeggio. Now let's do it up here. I'm going to start on the 12th fret, and I'm going to put my fourth finger on the 12th fret on the 5th string, and that's an A. So now wherever I play this arpeggio shape, the note I start on with my fourth finger on the 5th string, that note will be its tone center. So I do this shape, and I've got an A major arpeggio because I started it on A. If I started it on C, well, then I've got a C major arpeggio, and it's pretty much as simple as that, as long as you know where to find your notes. So that's one of the benefits of this exercise you're about to learn, is it's going to make you think about where things are. It's also going to make you think about the key that you're in. So the shape, again, the pattern, if you don't know it, is you start with your fourth finger on the 5th string. In this case, we're at the 12th fret. And then go with your third finger on the 4th string, just lined right up there. And in this case, because I was on the 12th fret, the third finger wound up being on the 11th. We then go to the first finger on the 3rd string, lined up again. This time it's on the 9th. Second finger lines up there at the 10th for the 2nd string, and then our first finger in the 9th fret. Now what we want to do when doing this is just drag the pick across the strings like that. And again, I'm not going to get super in depth with this technique, but just remember to do that. We're not lifting the pick. We're doing an alternate picking thing because we won't get that fast sweeping motion. Now we get to the top of our arpeggio. Let's hammer our fourth finger on the 12th fret and then pull it off. And then we'll go upstroke, 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 upstroke again to do the descending part of the arpeggio. Okay, now here's kind of the fun part. We're going to get into doing progressions with this. Right now we have a major arpeggio, And this shape could get us through any major chord situation when we're doing the 1-4-5 progression. If you don't know what that is, I do have a lesson on it, but I'll explain it very quickly. The 1-4-5 concept is where you take a chord in a tune, and we'll start with the tonic chord, the one that's built off of the tone center of our key. Let's say we're in the key of C major. C major is our one chord built off of the tone center C. Now that tone center leads us to our next chords that we know will work really well. They'll complement each other as long as we get the formula right. Now in this case, in a major key, and minors for that matter, the fourth tone in the scale would be a really good chord to go to next. So what I mean by 4 chord is this. I start on C, so C's 1, and our next chord is going to be 4 notes from C, and I'm going to count them on my fingers and make this really simple. C, D, E, F. That's 4 right there. C, D, E, F. 4 tones. C goes to F. Now let's just play some conventional chords and see if they really do go well together. Yep, that fits. Sounds pretty legit. Okay, the third chord in our progression is the 5 chord, and all we got to do is count 5 from our tonic chord C again. C, D, E, F, G. There's 5. G's our 5 chord. Now we'll put them together and see how this really sounds. So you can see that's a winning combination right there. I'm going to demonstrate real quick if I were to do it in the relative minor of that key, which is A. Now a lot of numbers getting thrown in here and some theory. Didn't want to get too into depth with that. But if we count 6 notes from C, we get to our relative minor, which is A. We're going to be using all the same notes that were in the key of C major. That's what a relative minor is. So here we go. This is going to be A minor. I'm going to do the 1-4-5. Okay, so there's the formulas we're going to be throwing around today. We could be either in a major key and we'll do the first note in the scale, the 4th, and then the 5th, so the 1-4-5. Or if we go to the minor, which in this case was A became the tone center, D was the 4 chord, and then E major was the 5 chord. You could do an E minor too. We'll get into that a little bit more later about like why we might choose one over the other. But let's get back to our arpeggio exercise. Now we understand a little bit about the theory that works behind it. We can now actually start working out this exercise all over the fretboard and switching it into all these different keys. Okay, now that we've already done the key of C major with the basic chords, let's get back into our arpeggios. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to do a C major arpeggio. I'm not going to do it down here. I want to use the shape that I was talking about earlier. That we do in the key, we did it in the key of A. All I got to do is move my 4th finger up to C. Not here though, it's not going to work. I'll bring it up here to the 15th fret and do that shape. And now I've got a C major arpeggio. Now here's the cool thing about it is I'm going to go to the 4 chord, which when we did earlier it was F, and F is right here at the 4th finger starting here at the 8th fret. Okay, and then it's always easy to find the 5 chord from here. It's just a whole step up. Right there's our G. Back to the C. Now, I'm not trying to say this is super simple at first. If you're not real familiar with a fretboard, it can be tricky. All the more reason to do this, because then you are not only practicing your arpeggios and thinking about chord progressions and their related chords and the chords that complement each other, you're forced to find them all up and down the fretboard, finding the notes on your 5th string. So I'll do it again. It's pretty simple in that way. We're just doing that linear sweeping thing with the pattern, and I encourage you to just do that until you get comfortable doing that chord shape over and over, and then try different keys. Cycle through the circle of 5ths. Again, more music theory being thrown out here. If you don't know what the circle of 5ths is, you might want to brush up on that a little bit too. But the concept, I'll explain it in its simplest form. It's where you go 5 notes from your the key you started on. So in this case, we're in the key of C major, and we did the 1-4-5 for that, C, F, and G. But then we want to go to the next key. It's important to think about this. Like, what would the next key be? It's a 5th away. C, D, E, F, G. On the circle of fifths, you could Google an image of it. You will see that C is at the top of the circle and G is the next one over down the circle going clockwise. Why that is considered the next key over is this. With each key, when you go a fifth, they found that to create the same scale formula and keep it in its major key, they had to add an altered tone each time, add a different one each time. So when you started out in C major, we found that there were no sharps or flats required to create that. But if you go into the key of G major, now all of a sudden we have an F sharp in there, different from the key of C major. No sharps or flats. That's the significance of the fifth. Every time you go a fifth from to the next key, you'll find you need another altered tone. There'll be a video on this eventually. But for now, it's a fairly basic concept. You can count on all 5 digits. We started with C, C, D, E, F, G. Now, if I want to go to the next key, I'd count another fifth from G, G, A, B, C, D, and so on. And I'm starting to work out all the keys. So let's go to our next key. It was G major. Now, that's the tricky bit again. It pulls us out of our comfort zone. We got to use the same arpeggio shape, the same technique, but we got to figure out where are these chords on the fretboard. Well, here's a G. What would the 4 chord be? C. And then our 5 chord, D. And back to our 1 chord. Now let's get into the minors. Most common duality in music, major versus minor, and I would be remiss if I didn't do the minors for this kind of thing, because sweep picking and arpeggios are so popular in classical guitar and metal guitar, which tends to be kind of a neoclassical thing oftentimes, and they use the minor keys so much. So this is a real this is something you really want to pay attention to here. Here is our minor shape. Now I'm going to do it in A again. We did the A major. The tonic was A, and I've got my 4th finger back in the 12th fret. Now it's going to be different this time though. Instead of going 4, 3, 1, I'm going to go 4, 2, 1. And then I got something interesting that happens here. A lot of people would reuse the 2nd finger, like that, on the 2nd string, 10th fret. And that is that's a really good fingering for that. You might notice in the video though that I don't do that. It's just I got in the habit of doing it a different way. I typically go 4th finger, 2nd finger, 1st finger, and then I switch to my 3rd, and I go to my 1st because my 1st has to now go back a half step. In this case, in the key of A minor, I had to go to the 8th fret. And the same thing as the major arpeggio. I'm going to hammer my 4th finger on the 12th fret, pull off, and then I'm just going to do it in reverse, same fingering with upstrokes. Now, when our minor key, we're going to do the 1, 4, 5, and notice on the 5 chord, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So we got A minor, and we're going to do the 1, 4, 5, and I'll do the math for you. That would be an A minor chord, D minor chord, and we're going to do an E major chord. So there it is, 2 arpeggio shapes required to do the minor keys. In all honesty, you could do an E minor for the 5 chord, but I've never thought it sounded as cool. I'll demonstrate. That was the E minor in there, and again, it would make it really easy for you to just do the minor arpeggio for all 3 chords for the minor. But listen to the difference when I do the major chord. See, I changed that note from that to that, giving us this leading tone back to the A. So if I did it in a scale, you'd have this. The minor scale would be like this. But since I changed that note to that one, listen to the difference. It's actually what is known as a harmonic minor, so it works perfectly. So again, minor progressions, these are arpeggios we're doing, 1, 4, 5. We're going to do minor chord on the 1, minor chord on the 4, major on the 5th, and it's going to sound perfect. So I'm going to do this in the key of A minor. Now, there's a reason behind all of these why I'm doing them this way. I started out with C because that key had no sharps or flats. Then I showed you to go to the next key a fifth away, which would be G because it's got 1 sharp. Then hence you'd go to the next key. The fifth from there would be D because it has 2 sharps and so on. But now when we cross over to the minors, you could do the same thing where you're in the key of A minor, has no sharps or flats, related to C. That's what they'd call a relative minor. And then I would go to the 4 chord of that, which is D. I am not going to go down to this one because I got little hands and it's a lot easier for me to just jump up to the D here. See, same note, just higher. And then I'm going to go to the 5 chord of that. It's going to be major. And I want an E, and I could do it up here. Or I could do it here. So that's the fun, working out in all these different places to play it. And it starts to really get you, more intuitive with where all the notes are on the fretboard. So I'm going to put them together. Okay, now here's where the real mental work can come into play when doing this. Let's say then we wanted to just sit back and play arpeggios for a while we're practicing and try to get better at it, but at the same time feed our mind, get better at thinking our way through these things. What you want to do is start with the key of C major because it has no sharps or flats. So now you're at the top of that circle of fifths and you do your progression. And before you count a fifth from that, find the relative minor. That is a 6th away. C, D, E, F, G, A. A minor would be our next key, no sharps or flats. Then we count a fifth, but in this case we're going to go back to the major, and so we were in C, we count a fifth from that, brings us to G. 4 chord is C. 4 chord, the 5 chord is going to be D. And then back to our 1 chord. Relative minor of that, a 6th again. G, A, B, C, D, E. Now we're going to be E minor, so I'm going to go to the E note here, to the minor shape there, then we're going to go to the 4 chord, which is A, and then we're going to go to B, that's the 5 chord, we're going to do B major. Okay, so I'm hoping that's making sense. That's taken just 2 arpeggio shapes and a little bit of knowledge about how music works with the 1-4-5 formula, the circle of fifths, and the sharps and flats or lack thereof, going to a relative minor. And that way, when you start to really get that ingrained in your brain how that works, it can make you so much more proficient and know how to bust these things out in the right settings and make your arpeggios musical. And I can't emphasize that enough. I think arpeggio sweep picking has gotten so popular, but it's more known for its just sheer speed, which that's cool. Speed is awesome, and I've worked very hard to play fast myself. But at the same time, I never want to lose sight of the musicality. And I have heard some players that do some blazing fast arpeggios, and it's so doggone fast that I can't even hear what it's doing musically. And it's still cool, it's valid, but as you notice, I'm not playing these blazing fast, I'm doing them slow. And when you do that, you can hear everything. And somebody that doesn't know their keys and how to stay in key, it may not sound as good, and they might just have to stick to blazing fast speeds. So anyway, now I've got the final thing on this lesson that I want to do to kind of gussy them up a bit, and it can make it a little trickier finding your way around the fretboard, but it sounds really cool. All of the concepts are the same: the circle of fifths, the 1-4-5s, the relative minors. But the pattern we're going to do, and I'm going to be posting all this up here too with the charts so that you don't get lost. It's kind of hard to see, I'm sure, everything I'm doing. But the charts should help. Take a screenshot of them with your phone or whatever, really examine them, print them out yourself, even even looking at them, if you can pause it and write it down, will help you remember it. Okay, so here we go. Here's the pattern. I'll do it in C again. So you're back to the key of C. But let's start with the highest note. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an upstroke, do a pull off, another upstroke, like that. And then I want to ascend back before I go all the way down. I'm not going to go all the way down yet. I'm going to go to the next note with a downstroke and cycle back up with those high ones again. See that? I did a hammer-on pull-off at the top just like we did like that. But in this case, we start with a high note. And then we reach the bottom. Sounds cool. I like that one. Now, we're not going to do all of them that way, though. That's what's going to make this a little more challenging but more rewarding. And one of the things about this, too, that's kind of tough is when I said we're going to go into C, but that's not a C right here. That's a G. The top of that arpeggio in C is a G, and that can be confusing. It's like, oh, well, where's C? I'm not even starting on a C. Well, you got to start being able to identify where the top note is so you accurately get to the bottom one. All right, so then you got that neat pattern. But when we go to the 5 chord, we're going to ascend first. So we've got this one. But then we're going to go to the 4 chord, which is F. And you notice that was different? I ascended with it. And I start to descend. I get to the 3rd string, and my pick shifts. I start going down strokes again. And I end on the hammer-on. I'll put those two together. Starting to get it? Okay, then we go to the 5 chord G, and I'm going to do the same pattern that I did with C. And then go to our tonic chord, and it's kind of the same pattern that we did with the 4 chord, where we start with a low note, hammer on pull off, and land on the 2nd string note in that particular pattern, because that's another C. I'll put it together for you now. Now, that can be used in the minor ones as well. I'll do A minor with it. So I go to A minor, and I'm starting here on E. You gotta remember, there's where it gets us when we start our shape right there on the tonic note. When I start on the high note, I'm going to go to my 4 chord. Same pattern as we were doing before, we're just doing it with different shapes. And now we'll go to our 5 chord. And back to our 1 chord. Well, I hope you found this informative. Again, there was a lot of stuff being discussed here that I couldn't really go super into detail with, but I just kind of wanted to get right to those exercises because somebody actually did just ask me today what I do for arpeggio exercises, and I found that these really work. They work really well, but I kind of like how this just gets down to the basics of music and then makes it sound pretty significant. I've always believed that the great ones practice the basics, so going and taking basic musical concepts that are universal and applying to this slightly more advanced technique makes a lot of sense. So I hope to catch you on the next video.